thank you for my friends. Spirit, thank you for my friends. My wonderful, my wonderful, my wonderful friends. My wonderful, my wonderful, my wonderful friends.
I have some news. Things don't always go the way you want them to. Even when you are the most enlightened of metaphysicians. And so I am reminded from time to time that my job is to keep my heart open. Now, what I find, and I know you guys don't do this, but maybe you know people that are like me, that as you're getting together over the holidays, you'll have wisdom and insight to share with them, is sometimes that if I move into my judgmental mind, my heart begins to close. I confuse my opinion with loving someone. And so I am reminded of Scripture, because it's everywhere. In Psalms it says, and I take liberties from time to time with gender, because I don't believe in a God that is male or female, but all of the above. And so in Psalm 111 it says, I thank God with all my heart for the gifts she has given humanity. Uncountable are his miracles, immeasurable her love. She has formed us in her image and kindled truth in our minds. And then in Deuteronomy, what we often call Old Testament, which our Jewish friends call Torah, it says, Hear, O Israel, Jehovah, the Lord our God is one. And thou shalt love thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words, which commands thee this day, shall be upon our heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk to them when they sit in thy house, and then when thou walkest by thy way, and when thou lies down, and when thou rises up. We are taught in the Torah to love the divine. We are taught to teach our children to love. We are taught to walk in grace, as we say, to walk with our hearts open, to love one another. Jesus brings this message home when someone comes to him and says a great question, what is the greatest commandment? And he picks up this theme and he says, the Bible says, and it says to them, he says to them, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the great and first commandment. And then he goes further to give us the real essence and the heart, I believe, of what is the Christian faith. And a second like unto it is, Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And on these two commandments, the whole law hangs, and the prophets. There's a lot in that. And we've heard it over and over. It is sort of the basic, to love thy neighbor as thyself. As I look around in our world today, there's questioning as to who is my neighbor. And that's sort of an eternal question. This is not a new 2019 question. This is a question that humanity has been asking itself from the beginning of time. And so the great spiritual enlightened ones say, everyone is your neighbor. In fact, there is no one who is not your neighbor. We are in a time, I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's a lot of polarity, a lot of divisiveness going on. I don't know if you've been under a rock, but if you haven't, you may be aware that there's a conversation going on in our world. And I think, Oh, Lordy, it's the holidays. Yay. We all get together and eat and opine, perhaps. And so, for me, it's just always a great reminder that my job is to keep my heart open. The fundamental message I believe that Jesus gave us, you can find everything else throughout the Old Testament and parts of the New, but what he came to us and said is that we are to love our enemies. We are to pray for those who persecute us. Right? We've all heard this, right? Do we practice? Is the question. You see, it's easy. You see, it's so easy to be in a loving spiritual community, and we all kind of think the same. Right? It's easy to love you. It may be challenging to love the one who differs from you, who may have a different ideology, who may have a different political stance, who may have a different religious point of view. And when we're not careful, this is the conversation I keep having with myself, is my heart open right now? As I said, it's easy to love the ones that are easy to love. Right? That is not spiritual practice, by the way. That's just easy. Right? I think I'll save that thought for another day. It's weird what happens up here from time to time. What the heck? Now you're all wondering what it was. So, a friend of mine just recently passed. Wonderful African-American man who was part of the community in Salt Lake City when I served there. So he was, I think, one of two people that was not white, because Salt Lake's pretty white. But and so he had an interesting experience of his life, but just such a great guy and just such a interesting character. And he just recently passed, and I was thinking about him. He was in a class one time, and we were talking about being of service. How can we be of service to the world? And he said, well, I'm really mindful of picking up after my dog. But I've gone a step further, and I pick up whatever needs to be picked up. I said, thank you. That's such a beautiful thought, because one thing is, picking up after your dog is just being responsible. Picking up after others. Now we're into service, right? Now we're into service. Now you're into a broader thing. So you'll remember this. You'll probably not remember anything else that I've talked about today, but somehow you'll remember that. I don't know. Right? You see, we're called to do more than what's comfortable or that we want. And so as we're living in this time, I believe it is just an invitation to keep open. Some people are dismayed by what's happening in our world, and I have moments of dismay, but I also have moments of hope. Because so often, what happens as we shift from one paradigm into a new is there is a tendency to hold on to the old. We must keep it the way it was in the good old days. And I'm always like, when were those? When were those good old days that were so darn good? Because there's never been a time that's been good for everybody on the planet. And as we move forward, I'm holding a vision for a world that works for all, where everyone is loved and valued and appreciated, where we recognize the humanity of who we are. And we celebrate that in each other. Life is moving in that direction, whether we recognize it or not. Tribalism is difficult in a world with internet, right? So we are evolving, we are becoming. So this idea of being with all my heart keeps coming back to this idea of, as we've been talking about, not someday when everything's perfect, but loving what is right now. Valuing what is. Now, there's a little prayer, you may have heard of it, I don't know. It says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. For many people, that's a staple, and for all of us, it should be. Because one of the ways that I find I struggle and others struggle is trying to change the things we cannot change. Now, I'm a young man, 62 years old, only been doing this for about 35 years. And I'm beginning to discover that I may not be able to change anyone around me. Even with all my brilliance. Even with my finely honed opinions and my philosophy. Right? We know this. So, there's a wonderful book. If you've never read it, I encourage it. It's called 5 Things You Cannot Change by David Rico. He also has another wonderful book called Being an Adult in Relationship, which should probably be must-reading for anybody that's on the planet. But in this book, he says, here's 5 ideas. And see, I know I'm sometimes, I use this ideology. So when I was a traditional Christian, in the sense of that God was somehow separate and heaven and hell were destinations and not states of mind and that kind of thinking, there was this idea that somehow if you got into heaven, everything would be good. So what are the rules? What do I got to do? And each religious tradition has a game plan for that, right? So you follow a game plan until you realize that doesn't really work for you, as in my case. Turned out I couldn't get in just by the nature of who I am. So I was like, okay, I guess I better find a new strategy. And then I found a community that said, we love everybody. We believe that the divine is within us. And we believe that there is a state of consciousness that we might experience as heaven. There's also a state of consciousness we might experience as hell. And when we are struggling, and when we are in that place of separation, there's a temptation to believe that it's something outside of ourselves. But our freedom comes from recognizing who we are. So in the old model, it was God trying to get God to be different so I might inherit the kingdom. Then I realized that God lives within me so that I would need to be different in order to experience the kingdom here. And so what I found myself doing from time to time, and I've seen others do this as well, is that we begin when our lives aren't perfect, when they're not flowing, when there's strife or there's struggle or there's upset or there's this or that, to question our own consciousness that somehow we're not evolved enough to experience the fullness of life. There is a tendency sometimes in New Thought, in New Age philosophy, to kind of reimpose that old modality onto the new modality, which just says, if you get it all right, then you're going to be happy, healthy, loving, rich, and thin. Ba-ding! Right? Right? And so we begin to kind of take our old-fashioned guilt and reinterpret it as new and improved guilt. New Age guilt. Neither of us serve us. So I kind of love this book because when we understand this, he says there's 5 things we should be aware of. That everything changes and dies. On this planet, everything has a life cycle. It is born and it is dies. And somehow some of us walk around as if we are somehow the exception to that very rule. But we have a pretty good track record of recognizing everything dies. And that things do not always go according to plan. right? That life is not always fair. Life is sometimes unfair. That pain is a part of life. And that people are not always loving and loyal all of the time. Sometimes the most intimate or most important relationships are not loving and loyal. And if we're not careful, we can form an opinion about how life is. So, are we down yet? Do we need to take a break and get coffee and maybe something stronger? Right? So, this is just laying out what is. Now, but he says, and this is the beauty. This is the beauty. That when we are cognizant, when we stop our resistance to those things that we cannot change, then we move into a place where we can be in a full-hearted yes to life and the graces that come from that. And so he goes on to say that although everything changes, the graces that come from these is that although everything changes and dies, things renew themselves and move through cycles that further evolution. I was talking with a friend of mine from a different faith tradition, an Eastern faith tradition. We kind of had a conversation about reincarnation. Now, he knows I'm a minister, so I think he was like, oof, do I want to go there? I'm like, yeah, I believe that. But I said, I'm not really, not sure how this all works, but I know that just in this lifetime, I've gone through several. I am not the kid that tried to outrun a police officer some 50 years ago. Yeah, 40. Okay. So, right? I'm not that person. That person just borrowed my body for a while so that I could grow and evolve. I had to die to an old way of being so that I could grow and evolve. And because I was thick-headed, I needed a big, fat life lesson slap upside the head so that I could change and be different. So if we allow, as we always go into this idea of the death and resurrection, that as we die to an old way of being, then something new can be born. But some of us don't want to die to the old way in order to have the new way. It's like get Amazon, have it delivered, and then I'll let go of my old way of being. Or grow up for the soul. I don't know. There's all these new things that are happening in our world that confuses me, right? So we literally have to die to an old way of being in order to be reborn to a new possibility. And he says, although things do not always go according to plan, we sometimes sense a larger plan at work through synchronicity that opens startling possibilities. If I could tell a story about my life, it was that every time my plan went awry, a better plan emerged. After I surrendered myself to the divine. After I was humbly willing to admit that there might be a greater idea than mine. That there might be a bigger power than me. That maybe there was an intelligence at work in this universe that was greater than I am. And so maybe, just maybe, if I listened to that, if I kept my heart open and my mind open and receptive, then I would be directed in new ways and into new possibilities. And so, although things have not gone according to my plan, something greater emerged. And although life is not always fair, something in us remains committed to fairness and refuses to be unjust or retaliatory. You see, there is injustice in the world. There are things happening in our world today that are just plain wrong. Now, we can say all kinds of things. Or we can become bitter. We can become disgruntled. We might even say, oh, let's just get mine. But there's a part of us that knows we're a part of a greater whole. And while there is injustice in the world, that does not mean it's okay for us to participate in it. But rather, we should work to be more loving, compassionate beings in the world. And we should continue that work until we reach that ideal of a world that works for all. There's something within us. And although pain is a part of life, we have ways of dealing with it, and thereby we expand our powers to handle further pain and help others in their pain. The greatest stories of the greatest biographies, the greatest stories of our lives, are those individuals who have endured pain, channeled their pain into a greater good. Mothers Against Drunk Driving channeled the most heartbreaking experience into a force for good. We're seeing this in our gun debates that are going on right now, that there's tremendous pain. And so we can use that to try and affect change in our world. Anything that we have suffered can become the opportunity for our service. Part of my mission in being a minister is to help people understand that there are alternatives to how we make life work. I didn't know about those when I was young. I didn't even know what this thing called pain was. I didn't know how to grieve through the loss of my lover. I didn't know nothing. I was young. You know, what's that great line? When I was young and stupid, I was young and stupid. Right? But through the pain that I experienced, I found a way. I found a path. I found a new approach to living. And so it became part of my mission to help others. I didn't set it out that way. I didn't know what that was. I thought I was taking some kids to camp. That was how they got me. I just mind my own business. I'll take you to camp. Didn't know it changed the rest of my life. But I found my path through my pain. When we can do that, when we stop trying to avoid the pain and address it, that is where the new pathway opens up. Right? I look around our society sometimes and I think this is a society that just wants to numb itself out. There is a pill for everything. Have you noticed that? Everything. They all have weird side effects, by the way. I'm always kind of intrigued when you hear these things on the ad and they're like, this, you know, you have these happy people having a picnic. They're schizophrenic or whatever. They're, you know, okay, cool, that's good. Take our pill. And then they go through the disclaimer. You're like, I think I'd just deal with what was, right? Who wants an oily discharge? I mean, I don't even know what that is, but I'm pretty sure I don't want one. Listen, it's one of the side effects, I'm telling you. Patricia, if I just said something horrible, you'll let me know, right? And so people aren't loving and loyal all the time. I'm sorry. I wish they were. But nothing has to get in the way of our acting with loving kindness and not giving up on others. No human action can take away another human being's capacity to love. Hear that. Ties back to what Jesus said. What we must do is love those who have harmed us. Pray for those who have persecuted us. In other words, we need to see others in the divine light of who they are. Now, this is not to say, my friends, that we should not take action when people are being inappropriate. And so what I find is the big challenge of life is loving people and taking action when action needs to be taken. You see, that's this wisdom. Grant me the strength. Grant me the wisdom so that I can tell the difference. So in my lifetime, I've discovered there's people that really want to hear what I have to say. Some of you are here. And there's others that will never hear what I have to say. And I can spend a whole lot of time and a whole lot of energy trying to get those ones who don't want to hear what I have to say to hear me. Or I can have it be easy and teach the ones that want to hear. But I'm still responsible for loving everyone. Learning to love what is. So I come back to this idea over and over that our spiritual work is about keeping our heart open to live more fully in the present. Because there is that thing that if we don't like what's happening right here, we futurize. And when all this gets cleaned up, then we'll be happy. Then we'll be peaceful. And so loving what is, loving where we are, and still working towards a healthier and happier world is the work. And without spiritual practice, I don't know how you do that. Maybe others have some ideas, but without some spiritual practice that helps me recognize a divine presence and an infinite being that is greater than who I am, that not only do I live in, but all people live in, allows me to connect with a larger something and holds that greater possibility not only for myself, but for others. And when I do that, I can be at peace. When I do that, when I say yes to reality, to the things I cannot change, it is like choosing to sit in the saddle in the direction the horse is going. Right? You ever tried to ride a horse backwards? Hard enough going forwards, but backwards it takes some skill. But when I can love what is, can recognize the things I can't change, then I can focus my time, my energy, my practice on what I can. And that is me. And who I am. And how I show up in the world. What a great gift. So we are told that we should love God, ourselves, and our neighbors with all of our heart, with the fullness of who we are. Danielle Marie said, I imagine that God would ask, how well did you love? How much joy did you create in the people around you? How much did you love and appreciate yourself, your body, and your own special gifts? How many hearts did you touch? As we are in this time of Thanksgiving, let us keep our hearts open. Let us remain grounded in truth. Let us work for a world that works for all. Let us pray. Just breathing into our heart, opening, feeling the presence of the divine. Feeling that awareness, that recognition of the one life, the larger life, that does express through us, that beats our heart, that breathes our breath. Nearer than hands and feet, closer to our breath, is the divine. And so we remember in this moment that there is only one reality, one life, one power, one presence, one God. And all of the qualities of spirit, joy, love, wholeness, harmony, peace, are ours right now. It is our divine inheritance. And yet each of us is left to make that realization for ourselves. And so in this moment, as we remember who we are, we call forth those spiritual qualities. We open our hearts fully. We open our minds to divine wisdom. We call forth the presence of wholeness, knowing that it reveals itself as health and well-being and vitality. We call forth the presence of love as we fully and freely forgive ourselves and others. As we pray for all people everywhere. We recognize and know that we are abundant beings here and now because we participate in a divine flow. That we joyously give and graciously receive of the divine bounty. How good it is to know this truth. And so as I speak these words of wisdom, of truth, with clarity and conviction, I know they are established. I know that we are blessed. And because we are blessed, we naturally extend that blessing. We bless this spiritual community, this divine idea called Unity of Charlotte. We bless our community, our larger community, our city, our state, our country, our world. We hold a vision for a planet of peace, a world that works for all. And as always, we bless all priests, rabbis, ministers, teachers of all faiths. For we honor and celebrate the many pathways to the divine. And so giving thanks that we have established in consciousness this truth, we release it to the divine law and through the power of the living Christ to go forth to be a blessing to all. And so in joy and in gratitude, I give thanks. I allow it to be so. As together we say, and so it is. Amen.
It might sound crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here, you can take a break. I'm a hot air balloon that could go to space. With the air like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that this is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness means to you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Here come bad news, talking this and that. Yeah, give me all you got and don't hold back. Well, I should probably warn you, I'll be just fine. Yeah, no offense to you, but take your time. Here's why. Because I'm happy. Clap your hands if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap your hands if you know that happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap your hands if you know what happiness means to you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Clap your hands if you feel like that's what you want to do. Come on. I'm so happy. You can't bring me down. Can't bring me down. I'm too high. I'm so happy. Can't bring me down. Can't bring me down. Because I'm happy. Clap your hands if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap your hands if you feel that happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap your hands if you know what happiness means to you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Clap your hands if you feel like that's what you wanna do. Because I'm happy. Clap your hands if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap your hands if you know that happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap your hands if you know what happiness means to you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Clap your hands if you feel like it's the right thing to do. Now come on. That make me down. That bring me down. I'm too happy. like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap your hands if you know that happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap your hands if you know what happiness means to you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Clap your hands if you know that that's the right thing to do. Because I'm happy. Clap your hands if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap your hands if you know that happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap your hands if you know what happiness means to you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Clap your hands if you feel like that's what you want to do. Happy!
All right.
All right. Susan. I'm going to call Farrell, let him know you nailed it. If he ever needs a backup, you're available. So I'm going to invite you to stand, and I feel like we got to do an affirmicize after that. So pay attention to those words, but do what I do and say what I say. These you can take home and practice. Now this goes. Now I have two hands. I can actually do this. So this is important. Something magnificent is happening through me right now.
Something magnificent is happening through me right now.
It is happening through my mind.
It is happening through my mind.
Through my body.
Through my body.
Through my affairs.
Through my affairs.
I think it.
I think it.
I believe it.
I believe it.
I accept it.
I accept it.
Rejoice in it.
Rejoice in it.
I name it good and very good. Thank you, God.
Thank you, God.
And so it is.
So it is.
Before you leave here today, please say thank you for being a blessing in my life to at least 3 people. Let us sing the peace song.